Doreen, we were expecting a couple more of your folks, right?
Yeah, one of our board members, I sent her a reminder a few minutes ago, and then one of my team members.
Okay. Did you make it down to the rodeo?
No, actually, I had invite to one of our friends had some horses running in the barrel race there, and they invited us to their box and all of that. But I don't know. I'm one of those. I stay home.
Well, good for you.
Yeah, and actually, the best seat in the house is on the sofa with the replay and yeah. So I usually go to Las Vegas every year.
I knew you did. That's why I
Yeah.
asked.
Yeah, and I usually just go 1 or 2 nights there, and I like just the hubbub and the Christmas shopping and kind of get away. But
Right.
anyway, yeah, no, stay home but it's all my mother in assisted living. I can't take any risk, period.
No. I had lunch with Stan Morton on Thursday down in Fort Worth, and he was just aghast. One, because Fort Worth canceled the Fat Stock Show.
Yeah, I know.
And then they turn right around and accept National Finals Rodeo. And there's 30,000 people running around Fort Worth without a mask.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, the production itself. I mean, they tested every contestant and they told them that if they tested positive, they were disqualified, and 2 contestants were disqualified.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Hi, Kelsey. Thanks for joining us.
Morning, Kelsey.
Good morning. How are y'all?
Good.
I'm good. Hey. Hey, Sarah.
Good morning, or hi, I guess it's still kind of morning.
Yep, it's still morning. I think this is everyone.
Okay.
Yep. So I'll introduce you real quick, Pete, if that's all right.
Yes.
So welcome, everyone. I'm Pat Smith. We have with us today Pete Peterson. Pete is a very good friend of mine. He's my coach. People think I have all the answers, and I will assure you I don't. And that's why I have folks like Pete in my life, because he asks the hard questions of me on a regular basis. And Pete, I know he doesn't like to talk about this, but as a retired 2-star general from the Air Force, retired in 2009? 7. And worked for Lockheed Martin for several years. And now he's not only a coach, but also a speaker. He has a nonprofit organization called Caleb's Challenge, where he works with people who are retiring from the military and talking about what life looks like after the military, having walked that path. It's challenging, and Pete does a great job with that. And he's also been a huge role player in the nonprofit leadership program we have here. He's an outstanding coach and mentor, and he's got some content that he wants to share with y'all called 40X, and I'll let him explain that. But I'm going to have to go dark at noon because I have another call, but I'll still be on with this. But feel free to challenge or ask questions. I use a lot of what he's going to talk about in what we do at Serve Denton in terms of execution. Often in strategic planning, we spend a lot of time working on the planning part, but we don't always follow through. And what Pete's going to share with you today is a way to put some things in place that will help you execute and really have follow through on what often organizations put together in their strategic plan. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pete, and hope you get a lot out of this.
Well, thank you, Pat, very much for the kind introduction. Great to be here and get to meet some of you for the first time, albeit online. And so make sure I can share my screen. Can you give me permission, Pat, on the security thing?
You've got it.
Okay. Okay, everyone see that okay?
Yeah.
All right, so this is going to be as a senior leader, I always like the executive version. And so I encourage you to buy the book or listen to the Audible. Most of the material is, follows. There'll be some additional things, but the basic idea of 4DX, 4 disciplines of execution, comes out of this work. Again, strongly recommend you buy the book or listen to it on tape. As Pat indicated, strategic planning often gets done. Strategic thinking is something people don't think about, but really to keep track of what's going on in the outside world. We all have experience in the last 12 months with the impact of COVID and external impacts on our organizations that we couldn't begin to think about or imagine. But keeping track of what's going on around us, both internally and externally, that focuses on strategic planning. Most of you probably have a strategic plan. I'm hopeful that it's out and active. For some of you, it may be, I won't ask for a show of hands, drawing dust. I'm waiting for the next time the board brings it up. But even if you have one, what I sense, and as I talk to leaders, is that very often, how do I get from a plan and the goals I've outlined, how do I actually make those a reality? I often have the goals, but it's the end of the year, it's 15 November, I've got 6 weeks left, and how can I possibly get to the goals I planned annually? And so I want to really focus on execution. It's something that I've spent a lot of time on, talked to people about, and believe that and I'll have a coaching example with a client of mine where they've applied this work. So the problem is, it isn't that you don't have good intent to do your strategic plan, but I have a day job, right? There's a whirlwind of things going on around us. That whirlwind comes out of the book. And that's what interferes with what I'd like to do and with all the things that are surrounding me. And so ultimately, oftentimes the CEO perspective, whether stated or unstated, I recognize this is really important, but it's not going to happen because I have this whirlwind and I've got to respond. And so what I want to do is provide a way out of that. It doesn't ignore the whirlwind, but puts it in perspective. So what are these disciplines? How do they work? Why do they work? And then how can they work both professionally? And the things we're going to talk about aren't just for your work, but often for a personal business as well, or personal goals. And so very quickly, a wildly important goal. He writes the book from an organizational perspective. And so he's going to talk, and I'm going to talk about wildly important goals, 1 or 2 for an organization for an extended period of time. Because if you have 10 of them, you can't focus, and very often none of them get done, you get frustrated and quit. And so it's very important to only have 1 or 2 from an organizational perspective. The things that we're going to talk about, as I said, can apply to personal goals just as well. The most important thing I'm going to talk to you about today, if you're not aware of the idea of lead measures versus lag measures, understanding that is so important, and the application of that to your business will make an unbelievable world of difference in achieving your goals. So I'll spend a lot of time on that. A compelling scorecard, why is that important? And ultimately a cadence of accountability, how do I work with my team as I set up this system and actually see it to fruition? His idea, a winnable game, right? That your employees want to win. They want to meet their goals, but they're often frustrated when they're unable to do so. So we want to create a system and a process for helping them be successful. And when they're successful, your organization will be successful. So again, we're not ignoring the whirlwind. There are things that have to be done as an executive director, as a leader on your team, things that you have to account for, things that will come up that you didn't plan for, have to get done. But the idea is, he would suggest 20%, right, focus on this, quote, wildly important goal that really has the greatest organizational impact. that it is number one among several to identify that will move the organization forward. Again, from an organizational perspective, his recommendations, no more than 2 for an organization or a team so they can focus. If you have an organizational, using my hands, if you have an organizational goal up here, you have a team that's supporting that goal, that team's wildly important goal should be, at least one of them should be directly supporting your goal. Otherwise, you're going in different directions. The senior leader can veto, but not dictate. What that means is when your team says, here's my WIG to support yours, you can say, no, that doesn't work, and here's why. But they need to bring something back. They need to own it. They need to have ownership of their own WIG and how they're going to process it. Ultimately, very simple bumper sticker framework. From X to Y by when. From this many donor dollars at the end of 2020 to this many donor dollars by the end of 2021, for example. A start line, a finish line, and a deadline. I want to talk briefly about goals. This is not in the book, but very often we think about goals only in terms of performance, meaning I've got something I want to accomplish by, again, the X, from X to Y by when. It's an event. Train and complete a marathon, research and write a grant by the end of the month. There's an endpoint and you're finished. Different from a habit goal, which is something you're going to do on an ongoing activity. And so as opposed to running and completing a marathon, I want to run 3 miles 3 times a week for next year or for the rest of my life as a habit goal, because I know it supports a larger goal of health, of being able to do the other things that I want to do. And so recognizing systems and processes, very often how we get to lead measures are having written down systems and processes that people know and understand, so that not only will they work for your organization and the team you have today, but it's easier to bring a new team member on board and to onboard them by showing them things that exist already that are written down. Goals good for planning. Systems actually help you make progress. So very quickly, a wildly important goal for an organization could be about donor giving. It could be number of children sponsored, if that's what your organization does, or something else. A team goal then would directly support donor giving. And so it might be related to an event. It might be related to ongoing activity that interacts with the donors, quarterly donor calls, thank you for your support, or something of that measure. And personally, could be financial, could be fitness, could be a family, are the kinds of goals that you might use. So I want you to take, I've written this for a workshop where we're face-to-face. So I'm going to ask you just very quickly, 30 seconds, write down one professional and one personal goal that you would have. And then I'll ask a volunteer or two maybe to share a professional goal. Okay, anyone have one that they would be willing to share with the group?
I can share a professional goal I'm looking at is continuing kind of on topic for today, project management training and certification in the next year or so.
Okay, all right. And so are you involved in that already?
Researching, getting ready to pick which route to go. So.
Okay, perfect. All right. Anyone else?
One of my goals and the reason to participate in this this workshop is our strategic plan. I feel we have sort of through time strengthened our strategic plan, and right now it's probably the best it's ever been, but I think that there's some room to strengthen it, and that is engagement in the strategic plan on multiple levels. So my goal would be to have, you know, more engagement in the strategic plan execution portion of the strategic plan. We have, you know, a nice, beautiful plan, and
Right.
you know, the leadership team works it pretty well. But I think there's a way to roll it out and get other people to engage in it.
And you may have said it and I missed it. So you're talking about your organization or the board or both?
The organization.
Okay, organization. All right, great.
Well, and the board.
Yeah, I think the board can be a little bit more difficult, but I think it's equally important.
Well, that's
And-
why I invited one of our board members on this call, so she's going to be my anchor.
All right, excellent. And who, I'm sorry, is that Sarah?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, okay, good. Yeah. All right, and so this idea again of where do we want to get to, but what does it take to get there, as we'll talk about leading measures. All right, perfect. And again, I've left some time. I actually want to do an exercise with you kind of as a group on someone's professional goal, just to work through this process fairly quickly as an example. So I'll be looking for a volunteer a little bit later on. So most of us, when we think about goals, we don't say this necessarily, but we're most times talking about lag measures, historical outcomes, things that have already happened, right? When I stand on the scale, you know, and look at my weight this morning, the weight is going to tell me the outcome of what I've done for the last X, Y, you know, days with regard to eating, exercise, and so on. It's a number. I can quantify it, but I can't do anything about it, right? It is what it is. It's an outcome. And it's good that we track those. We need to know what is the goal that we're shooting for. On the contrary, on the other side or complementary are lead measures, right? What are the actions and activities that I can leverage that will move the lag measure, right? There are things that can be directly influenced by your team. So if I want to grow revenue, I have to make sales calls. If I want to get customer satisfaction, then I'm going to have some means of understanding what that looks like. Quality, how am I going to measure whether people are producing quality or not? And so the biggest challenge, an important one, not always easy, but it gets easier over time, is what are those actions that drive the lead measures that ultimately cause you to reach or not reach your lag measures, your goals. And so, again, I'm going to do a little, not in the 4DX, but habits, because we're talking about a long term. And so one of the ideas, again, is that systems work, and so habits work. A keystone habit, and very often fitness is one that researchers have found that for people who keep fit or change their fitness to the positive, it has a positive impact across their entire life. And so there are certain things that will actually have a cascading effect, if you will. In some cases, that could be a weekly staff meeting. It could be quarterly calls to donors. It could be fitness routines. It could be family dinners. In other words, out of a family dinner, the activities, the discussion actually have a variety of good outcomes with regard to relationships within the family. Daily rituals. Now, most of you, if I ask if you had any rituals, you'd probably think that I'm asking about spiritual exercise. I'm not. A ritual is just a process or a procedure. And so I won't ask for a show of hands. Some of you reached for your phone before you got out of bed this morning to look and see what was on it, right? That may work for you, but very often it really just sends you off in another direction. And so the idea is I'm doing certain things every morning, during the day, in the evening that set me up for success, that create an environment for success. I've given you a Michael Hyatt article. You know, he has a morning routine that sets him up to go to work. He has a start work. What do I do when is the best thing to do when I sit down to work is to look at my email? Or are there some other things that actually set me up for success before I get that first frustrated email and go off on a tangent? And so this idea of habits, of both personally and professionally. I don't have enough time to go into it, but it's very important. It works for me both personally and professionally. And if that's not something you've thought about, I would encourage you to think about that. So take a moment, 60 seconds, and see if you can think about what are the lead measures. Lead measures just what activities could I do on the front end that would lead me to be successful in whatever goal you identified previously. So for Doreen, you said really you were working on the strat plan. So there's probably so pick one goal that's important and think about a lead measure for that goal. There could be several, but that will help the focus, I think. Okay, any thoughts? Someone able to come up with a lead measure for your goal?
I'll share mine. So lead measure would be to specifically schedule time every day to make my sales calls and make sure I make X amount per day of whatever it is that I'm trying to do, or talk to X amount of businesses per day, but literally schedule that time in my calendar rather than trying to avoid it saying it needs to get done, but not scheduling.
Perfect, exactly, right? And so that lead measure, those, in other words, sales calls, you have to do X number for your industry in order to get a sale. And you don't know it'll be perfect, but over law of large numbers, right? In your industry, it may take 60 calls to get 10 sales, but whatever that is, you can, and I'm going to do an insurance policy example here in a little bit that I have from a client friend that will be similar. And it's a pretty direct correlation. It may vary for your industry, vary for your situation, but you can put that on your calendar. And very often, if it's not on your calendar, it won't get done. Good. Anyone else?
I think to my example, I think having a scheduled, whether that be monthly, interdisciplinary kind of team meeting, where we bring together people from, the ones I'm trying to engage in the strategic planning process, and then have people assign them sort of ownership or have them volunteer to be, participating in one segment of the plan.
Okay. All right, good. Very good. And that'll lead right into our next topic. So anyone else? Okay, so the third discipline is keep a compelling scoreboard, all right? Compelling means it drives action. And what's important for the employees is, one, that they know the score, not only of the lag measure, not only of the goal, but of the lead measures that are moving them toward the goal. In some cases, it may be the team's lead measures. In some cases, it may be individual, depending on what level you're looking at. The book talks about an example of being at a football game where the scoreboard is out, right? So if you're sitting in the stands with no scoreboard, how do you even keep track of what's going on? Is it first down? Is it second down? If you know a little bit about football, you may know, but the whole idea, right, is you're at the game, you glance at the scoreboard tells you everything you need to know at one glance about how the game is going. Are you winning or are you losing? And how much time is there left in the game? Simply. And so the player scoreboard, simple to understand. It's visible, either physically visible or could be online visible, available for everyone to see. And perhaps the most important part is designed by the players. They have ownership. They've designed the scoreboard. And if they have ownership, they're more likely, one, to keep it up to date, but two, then to use it because they designed it. So engagement. There are statistics out there, not for nonprofits, not for your organization, certainly but in general in organizations, that anywhere from 60 to 80% of people are essentially not engaged day to day at work, right? They're there, they're showing up for X hours, but in terms of being actively engaged, they're not. So you want your players to be actively engaged. Again, you have motivated people because of the kind of work that you do, but they can be more actively engaged. They know the score. They know that lead measures are as important as lag measures, if not more important. And number one, they have a direct influence on the lead measures, which will have an influence on the lag measures. So a simple electronic scoreboard could be something like this, right? And in particular, it may be a couple of measures, and so the actions may all contribute to these measures, or it could be measure one is contributed to by action 1 and 2, or measure 2 is contributed to by 3 and 4. Lots of ways you can easily develop an electronic scoreboard that comes up that's easy for people to see. I threw these in. I don't know if they're good examples or not exactly, but the whole point is you can be very creative, right? The team gets to decide what they want their scoreboard to look like. And if they want to design it, if they want to sew it, if they want to, whatever it is, the point is it motivating to them? And can they quickly see, are they winning or losing? That's the bottom line. So I'm not going to ask you to design, but the idea would be then to think about, well, what would your scoreboard look like? Or what are the questions? What might you anticipate a meeting with your team that would lay out the kind of design for the scoreboard that might work for you? So finally, and this leads in to Doreen, what you were saying is this idea of a cadence of accountability. Sometimes accountability has a negative connotation, but I like to think of it as a positive. We're accountable to each other because we're involved in something that's bigger than all of us, right? It's more important than us individually. And so our accountability is that we want to accomplish the things that we've committed to do because it will move the organization forward. And more importantly, it will support the customers that the clients that we serve in our organization. Depending on the level, right? Doreen, you said a couple times a month, perhaps for a larger organization, for key leaders, board members, perhaps. If it's a smaller team, it's probably weekly. And then it may be part of your weekly staff meeting. I think Pat may do some of this as part of his weekly staff meeting, if I recall. But in some cases, if you really want to focus on it, you can have a separate meeting once a week just for that. The author might even suggest it's a stand-up meeting. That this is going to be very quick, right? What did I commit to last week and did I get it done? How are we doing on lead and lag measures together as a team and perhaps individually? And then based on that, what commitments will I make? Very often you'll have a week where maybe you personally struggle and maybe you weren't able to complete your commitments. Well, that's life in the big city. Stuff happens, but you want to commit to the team that you're going to catch up next week and here's what you're going to do. So it's about accountability, not from the top down, but pure accountability within the team because you're all working together. You may have the same goals. Each of you may contribute equally, or as you'll see in a minute, you may have different goals based on your role as to this particular lead measure. The leader may be accomplishing some of the same things, or in some cases, really they're monitoring, they're responsible. They may not be specifically making sales calls, but they're setting the pace in terms of what they can do, and in particular, weekly to each team member, what can I do to help clear the path? What is it, right, that may be getting in your way that seems hard for you to fix, but as the executive director or as the board chair, perhaps you have some means where you could make that easier and facilitate them accomplishing exactly what it is that they've committed to do. So again, the next step, I won't ask you to do it at this point, would be, again, to think about and then meet with your team and say, what does it look like, right? How does a team, I won't ask for a show of hands, we all may think we probably have more meetings already than we need. And so that that's something that we need to make sure this doesn't become a 60-minute, right, off track. A stand-up meeting for 10 or 15 minutes that focuses on one thing, right? The lead measures and lag measures for this one wildly important goal. That's all that's going to be accomplished in this meeting. And if there's something that needs more time, set up a separate meeting off to the side, right, at a different time. So you value the time of each member of the team, and you make it clear that you're focused on that one thing that is going to move the organization forward. Okay, an example. I had a client who runs a small insurance business. He sells homeowners, all the driving, all the standard kinds of insurance, but an area that he wanted to focus on, it has a revenue impact larger than some others, are life policies. And so recognizing 2020 is not a terrific year, at the end of June, as we were talking, he had sold 6 life policies when he was shooting for something like 60 or 80. So he is 10% towards a low goal halfway through the year. And so that's his lag measure. So as we talked, I introduced the idea of what are the leading measures that will get you to life policies sold. And so he elected to say, okay, I think for the next 6 months, we can do 8 policies a month, 8 life policies. And that would get us to a total of 54 by the end of December. So what are the actions? There are customer calls, face-to-face meetings. Ultimately, you need to write an application. That application has to go through the system. And when all that's occurred, you actually get an approved life policy and revenue. So the scoreboard I'll show you in just a minute would show progress in both the lead and lag measures. And then this particular client had a weekly meeting, but he would meet independent. He would meet separately one-on-one also each week, talk about how that person was doing on their particular goals. And so the scoreboard that I will tell you he developed probably, he didn't ask the team to help him, but essentially leading measures. So you have to get an ask by a telephone call, by a face-to-face meeting. Most of them were telephone calls or emails that were setting things up because of COVID. So as quotes and life meetings would be by telephone or online and Zoom, but ultimately they would need an application and ultimately a policy would be issued. His estimate based on his experience in the business was he had 4 workers. They didn't necessarily have the same number, but here were the goals, the monthly goals, the total asks of some kind that they would need to make. These quotes and life meetings they're similar, right? Either write a quote or actually have a meeting in person. They're kind of the same thing, different format. But ultimately that would lead to each team member getting this many applications per month and then issued. Now there's a lag between getting an app and actually having it go through the system. There's some medical perhaps and other things to actually get it issued. There could be a lag there, but essentially based on his experience, he's saying if we do 100 asks, okay, we should get this many here. We should be able to write 12 applications. And if we get an application, 2 out of 3 of those applications will actually get us revenue and result in a sold policy. So I don't have his weekly meetings, his weekly trackers, but what I can tell you, he started with 6. His goal was 54 at 8 per month. Oftentimes activity in a month wouldn't show fruit